Today we're going to look at an app that builds on some of the things that we learned in the previous exercises. It's called PaintPot. It's essentially a painting app, drawing app, combined with a picture service. So you could take a picture, it'll start with a picture, it's a nice cat. But it also has the ability to take a picture. And you're able to choose from 3 different colors and draw on the picture. So we've all seen apps like this where you can take a picture and you can draw on that picture. This is essentially what that app is doing. So you can dip your finger into the virtual paint pot, as we were saying. Drag your finger along the screen. This is an important new thing. How to record a drag. How does that get calculated? Poke the screen to make dots. That we've already done. Use the button at the top to wipe the screen, so to clear the screen clean. That it'll erase it. It won't work like an eraser. Change the size of the dots to larger or smaller with buttons at the top, and then take a picture with the camera and then draw on that picture. If you're using the emulator, the Knox emulator, the camera will actually work. It'll use your computer camera. If you're using the App Inventor emulator, the camera won't do anything. It won't take, at least I don't think it will, take control of your camera. So if you really want to see this work, you definitely want to use the Knox emulator. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to walk you through this process, and then I want you to code it. So I don't want you coding right now. I want you to go through the whole video, watch the whole thing. In addition, there are other videos attached to this that are kind of more step-by-step than this will be. So if this is enough, watch this video, and you guys can go ahead and do that. You can also read the notes from the notes link and just see the same thing that I have here and follow through that way. Or if you want something very detailed, step-by-step, you can look at the step-by-step videos below that. But don't feel that you have to watch all the tutorial videos that are here. If you can see, there's, pull it up. There's quite a bit. It takes you through several tutorials to actually build the whole thing, and adds in a couple extra things that we're not going to talk about, like adding in a slider and things like that. So here's what we're going to learn: how to use a canvas component for drawing. We've talked about that, but we're going to handle drag events. That's new. Controlling the screen layout with arrangements. We've done some of this. We're going to do more of the arrangements, the horizontal and vertical arrangements. Using event handlers that take arguments. Up to now, the only event handler we've dealt with is just pressing a button, or the I am shaking part of that. So now we're going to actually get some arguments into those events, and defining variables to remember things like the size of the dot the user has chosen for drawing. Getting started, you're going to need to make sure you have your computer and your device set up, and you have to create a new app called PaintPot. There is no starter for this, at least I don't think there is. Like I said, there is no startup app for this. The name you're going to choose is called PaintPot. You're going to have a component on it called Screen 1. We don't need to change that right now. And then the title of the screen is what you'll see on the device's title bar. That we want to make sure it is changed to PaintPot. So essentially, when you first start, you have a blank canvas, well, not a blank app, not a blank canvas, and you're going to put in the title and call it PaintPot. First thing we're going to create is 3 different buttons: red, blue, and green. So you're going to drag the buttons on like we've seen before. You're going to change the property of each of those components so it says red. So for example, you're going to change the color to red and change the name of the button to red buttons. That way we know in code which button we're talking about. Then you're going to take those 3 buttons and put them into a horizontal arrangement. We've seen this before. We did it with the Martin Luther King pictures. We put them into a horizontal arrangement. The other thing you might want to do is center that horizontal arrangement. So you click on the horizontal arrangement and change the alignment property to center, so that way all the buttons are centered on it. Or leave them off to the left. That's entirely up to you. Come on. So from here, you're going to add in a canvas. So from the palette's drawing animation category, choose a canvas component, change its name to drawing canvas, set its width to fill parent, and its height to be about 300 pixels. That's going to give us enough room at the bottom to put some more buttons. There is an image called kitty.png you can download. If not, you can use any picture you want. It doesn't have to be the cat. You can use anything at all. We're eventually going to change it so it can take a picture with the camera. So this is just the default starting picture. You're going to set the background image of the canvas. Notice we're not adding an image property. We're not dragging into an image component to the canvas. We're just changing the background image of the drawing canvas. So this is another way of handling images. The first way we dealt with was dragging an image property over and putting that onto the screen. The second way was dealing with an image sprite, where we can actually have methods that control it. And now we have our third method, which is to change the background property of something. In this case, we're changing the background property of the canvas. You can also change the background property of the buttons to be images as well. We saw that when we did the Martin Luther King. So we're going to set the paint color of the drawing canvas to red, so that way when the user starts the app, red is already all set up. So that way we already have the color right there, so we're going to set the pen to red. Then we're going to add in some more buttons. So we're going to put a horizontal arrangement for those buttons, and we need a button for take a picture button, and the second button will be a wipe button, and then the next buttons will be, let's see, small button and big, small and big. So that way we can have everything set up. So once you have this all set up, you have everything ready to go. One more component is we need the camera component. That is from the media. So you're going to draw that in there so that way we can take a picture when we're ready. So this is the design part. So we're all set up here with our design. We're ready to go ahead and do the code. You need to make sure in your component section here, everything is named properly. If you're not naming these things properly, what ends up happening is it gets very confusing in code. App Inventor doesn't care what the names are. You're going to care what the names are. If you just name it button 1, button 2, button 3, it's going to get confusing later. Oh, which was the red button, which was the blue button, which was the green button, which was the button that wiped the screen, which was the button that made bigger dots, smaller dots. I had, when I first started coding with visual type interfaces, I remember making a database form, and I had literally like 60 different buttons on the screen. And I made the mistake of calling them button 1 through button 60. It was horrible trying to figure out what everything did. And going back later and trying to change something was impossible. So it makes sense in the beginning to make a good habit of changing names of buttons so they are clear. So you know what the button is supposed to do. That's different than the label that appears on the button. So there's two things. The label that appears on the button and the button name itself. The button name itself can't have spaces. So red button all has to be run together. The label that goes on the button can have spaces. That's fine. So you could do red space or just put the word red so people know what, or red color or red space pen, whatever you want to say. So now we have to add in our behaviors to our buttons. So we have our canvas component in a drawing canvas, like all canvases. It has a touch event and a drag event. So this is different, and the drag event is a little tricky. So we want first to do the touched event so that it calls the drawing canvas.draw circle. We did this in the last practice where every time you touch on the screen, it draws a circle. We're going to do essentially the same thing again. I would make them solid dots so that way it actually looks like you're painting. If you make them open dots, then it's not actually going to be painting anything. So we want solid dots. And we can change the size of the dots to bigger and smaller so that way you can paint big dots or small dots. The other one we're going to look at is the drawingCanvas.dragged event and the drawingCanvas.drawLine event. We're also going to be able to change the paint color, and we're also going to clear the drawing canvas and change the background image with the camera. So let's dive in. The first thing we're going to do is the touched event. And this time we're going to take the X and Y components and use those to draw a circle. So we're going to use our drawing canvas. I know you guys have one more property down here that says fill in. And we're going to set our X and Y to the get X and the get Y respectively and put in a radius to start. But the radius is going to be dependent upon the size of our dots. And we know we want to control that. So this is going to have to be a variable. So we can also use the touch sprite, but again, we're not going to use that because we're not actually touching any particular sprite. We're just touching the canvas. So we want the get X and the get Y. And for right now, let's just put in a placeholder for the radius that's 5. You're going to come back and change that to a variable. This looks really, really complicated. The canvas1.dragged event. It has lots of parameters. We have start X, we have start Y, we have previous X, we have previous Y, we have current X, we have current Y, and we have the sprite that we're actually dragging. Now this last one we're not going to worry about. We're not dragging any sprite. We're just drawing across the screen. So let's talk about what each one of these do. Start X and start Y. This is the position of your finger when you started the drag. So when you first touch the screen and start dragging your finger across the screen, this is where that drag starts. Current X and current Y is the current position of your finger. Previous X and previous Y is the previous position of your finger right behind the current. They might say, wait, why do I need that? Well, sometimes you want to actually have the color behind your finger. You don't want the color underneath your finger. And I know that sounds very subtle, but if you're talking about something small, sometimes you want that color so you can see where it ends right at the edge of your fingernail rather than being underneath your fingertip. Sometimes it's easier if it's behind it rather than underneath of it. And then drag sprite is a Boolean that lets us know if we're actually dragging a sprite across the image. We're not going to worry about that right now, but that's what that's going to be doing. So we're going to use it to draw a line. But the line we're going to draw is actually going to end up being really, really short because we don't necessarily want a straight line. We just want something that is just a very, very short line. It's going to end up letting us draw anywhere we want on the screen in any shape whatsoever. Notice that the drawingCanvas.drawLine method has 4 different blocks here. X1, Y1, X2, Y2. Should make sense. It's the start and the end. We want to use the previous and the current are the 2 blocks that we want to fill out here. And anybody say, now wait a minute. Why not just use start? Well, if we use start, what would end up happening, if this was your starting point, and you started to drag your finger, every dot that you dragged your finger to would draw a line from the start, which is not really what you want. That kind of gives you a really weird effect. It's all would be coming from this one spot. Now, if that is what you want, it kind of acts like a fill. It's a little bit weird, the way it kind of ends up propagating on the page, but you could do that. It will do that for you. What you really want to do is do a very short little line from the previous dot to the next one. Now, when I say line, you guys know in geometry, when we say a line, lines go on forever. In computer science, when they say line, they really mean line segment. It's a short, teeny, tiny little line segment, only about 1 pixel big. So when you combine all those line segments together, it essentially gives you the ability to free draw across the screen. So the effect allows you to just draw anywhere you want. They're just teeny tiny little line segments. It might look a little jagged, but it really should be pretty good for our purposes. You've probably seen other apps that have much smoother line drawing. In fact, that's a pretty big app selling feature, is if the line that you draw is really, really smooth, that makes the app better. I think one's called Bamboo that does a really, really nice smooth line when you draw across the screen. It's actually really hard to do. Because if you think about it, your finger's touching and moving in increments. It's essentially jumping. So it depends upon the sensitivity of your screen, and it requires some pretty sophisticated algorithms to smooth out that line. Because it's essentially guessing. What should the distance from here to here? It's not a straight line. It actually ends up making it a slight curve in order to smooth it out. If it makes a straight line like we do have in this case, you get that jagged kind of look to it. So it won't be as smooth as you might have seen on some of those other drawing apps, but it will do what we want it to for our purpose. The thicker you make the line, the less noticeable that is. If you're doing a very small, fine line, it's going to be very noticeable. Then we got to add in our event button handlers. These are pretty straightforward. When any of the color buttons are clicked, we're going to change the drawing canvas's paint color to the color that we want. We also want to clear the drawing canvas with the white button. So you're going to make all of those buttons functional in that way. Remember, our default color is going to be red. That's the first color it starts with. Next is the camera. Now the camera is a two-step process. Step one is to take the picture. Step two is to do something with it. So step one, when the take picture button is clicked, we're going to tell the camera to take the picture. So that'll activate the camera on your device. Then you'll follow through whatever the camera system is in order to take that picture. So you have to press a button and it'll actually take the picture. So it gives control over to another app. Whatever the default camera is on your device will now get control and be opened, and you will take a picture with that camera. Whatever controls are available, you have access to all of those. That's why it'll work on your emulator and pull up the camera on your computer. After we have the camera, what we have to do is do something with the image that we receive. So when camera one dot after picture. So after a picture has been taken, we're going to take the image and store it as the background image. So you can have a cute little picture of somebody and then start drawing pictures and all kinds of little funny things on them. No taking pictures of other students, no taking pictures of teachers. You can take pictures of, stuffed animals, whatever, but don't take pictures of other students or teachers. Let's talk about changing the dot size. So the dot size is the draw circle method, and when we first started, we set it to an R. We want to be able to change the thickness so we can adjust the different values of R just by pressing a button. So let's say by going up 5 and 10. So we have 5 size dots and 10 size dots. If you want to make it more sophisticated so that it increments rather than just jumps, you can do that. You have to do some math and make it so that way when you hit big, instead of saying big, it says bigger. But we're only going to do size 5 and size 10, so small dots and big dots. So we're going to create a variable called global dot size. When you create your variable, you start it at 5. When the person presses the bigger dots, it'll change it to whatever. So bigger dots are 8, smaller dots are 2. Again, if you wanted to make it increment and decrement, you would do the math here and have it increase the global value by 1. And put that math in so it changes the size by 1. Or decreases it by 1. So that way they can dynamically change the button size, dot size, rather than just being set to a particular size for the whole thing. So here's the whole code. I'm going to leave, you can pause the video here if you want and look at it so you can see how all the code works. And this is what everything that should be in there for the code for your design. Once you have completed this project, you will submit both the AIA file and the APK file, including any modifications that you did. Feel free to change it as you want, but this is the bare minimum. You have to have this bare minimum running and working for your app to be successfully graded. But I need both, the AIA and the APK. If you don't have both files, I'm going to send it back to you and tell you it needs to be redone. Couple variations. The user's interface doesn't give you much information about the settings, so you can put that information in there. You could show the user the dot size. You could also let the user type in the dot size inside of a text box. So instead of just using a plus and minus type of effect, they could just say, let's make it 20. Let's jump it down to 5. Let's make it 78. It makes it a little bit easier if you can type it in rather than having to hit plus, plus, plus. In addition, if there's no feedback, you don't know how big the dots actually are until you start drawing. So having some more feedback for that could be useful. The drawing canvas lets you draw on it. It also sends touches and drags. You can map these events with the drawing functions. You can use screen arrangement components to organize your layout. Some of the event handlers come with information about the event, such as the coordinate system of where the screen was touched. You can create variables we saw, and for each variable you define, App Inventor automatically supplies a get global reference that gives you the value of the variable. Now, we also talked briefly about local variables. That's different. We'll do more of that when we look at the methods, but for right now we're just using global variables, so everything has access to that. So that's essentially what we did today in the lesson. Get working on PaintPot, submit that into Blackboard, and we'll see you next time.